Only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dewbs & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
6 o'clock, this is Dewbs & Co with me, Bev Turner, coming up tonight. Do you want more referendums on the big issues? Immigration, the NHS, net zero and so on. Would that be more democracy in action or a cop-out for elected MPs? And shocking figures around the housing market. Since the pandemic, private rents have gone up 29%, with 1 in 5 people now spending over 50% of their income on rent. How do we get people back on the housing ladder? Also, as Angela Rayner is defended by colleagues as the victim of a class-based witch hunt, why are so many MPs privately educated? Why does it even matter? And do the likes of Rayner, Lee Anderson and other MPs from normal backgrounds get treated differently? Plus, a viral video of a professional golfer on the receiving end of some classic mansplaining. But is it always condescending to women? Could it just be a thrusting male confidence that we women could emulate? And don't forget to have your say.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family. Simply go to gbnews.com/your say.
That's all to come in the next hour with 2 fantastic panellists for a Friday night. But first, the very latest news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Bev Turner, thank you. The top stories this hour. The former chief executive of Royal Mail says he doesn't know if money paid by sub-postmasters who were wrongly accused of stealing was recorded as profit. Adam Crozier told the Horizon Inquiry this afternoon that he assumed the money was accounted for by the company's financial team, but admitted he couldn't be sure. He also said he was not aware that lawyers within the Royal Mail Group conducted prosecutions and conceded that sub-postmasters should not have been treated as thieves. Sir Keir Starmer says he's confident Angela Rayner has not broken any rules after Greater Manchester Police launched an investigation over her tax affairs. It's over the sale of her council house in Stockport a decade ago. Questions have been asked about whether she paid the right amount of tax and if it was her main home. In a statement, Angela Rayner said the questions raised relate to a time before she was an MP and she set out her family's circumstances and taken expert tax and legal advice.
We welcome this investigation because it will allow a line to be drawn in relation to this matter. I am fully confident that Angela Rayner has not broken the rules. She will cooperate with the investigation as you would expect, and it's really a matter for the police.
Energy Minister Graham Stewart has announced he's standing down from his cabinet role to focus on local issues. The Beverley and Holderness MP said he plans to focus on issues such as making roads safer, broadband delivery and increasing the number of defibrillators in his constituency. Justin Tomlinson now takes on the role of Minister for Energy Security and Net Zero. A passenger on a tram who was involved in a struggle with a knife-wielding attacker has been told he will not face criminal charges. Police say Kyle Knowles, who was 32, was armed with a knife when he boarded a tram in Nottingham in June last year. He then launched an unprovoked attack on a passenger, causing serious knife wounds. However, the alleged attacker was himself fatally stabbed during the struggle. Nottinghamshire Police arrested the passenger on suspicion of murder shortly after the tram came to a stop. They've now concluded that he acted in self-defence. A man who attacked and killed another man with a serrated hunting knife in a Cornwall nightclub has been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 23 years. Jake Hill also injured 4 others in just 20 seconds outside the Eclipse nightclub, causing fatal wounds to 32-year-old Michael Ridio-Allen, who intervened to protect others. The judge praised the victim's bravery, calling him a man of exceptional qualities. 22-year-old Tia Taylor also received a 3-year sentence for manslaughter, and 23-year-old Chelsea Powell was jailed for 15 months for perverting the course of justice. A 23-year-old man has denied murdering a Good Samaritan who died as he tried to help a stranger. 46-year-old Chris Marriott was on a post-Christmas walk with his wife and 2 young children when he stopped to help a woman who was unconscious in the street. He was killed when a car ploughed into a small crowd following a disturbance in the Burngreave area of Sheffield. Hassan Janga denied the murder and manslaughter of Mr Marriott, but he pleaded guilty to causing his death by dangerous driving. There are serious shortcomings in the Bank of England's economic forecasting methods, according to a report by former chair of the US Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke. It found staff were using out-of-date software with functions that could be automated, often performed manually. It comes after several of the bank's forecasts were repeatedly inaccurate during a period of economic turbulence. Researchers have discovered the cause of the brightest burst of light ever recorded. The luminous burst of light, which occurred more than 2 billion light-years from Earth and just lasted seconds, was so bright it was said to have blinded space instruments. The findings published in the journal Nature Astronomy suggest boat's likely origin is an explosion or supernova that came after the collapse of a massive star. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Bev Turner.
Very good evening. It's Dewbs and Co, but with me, Bev Turner, tonight while Michelle is off for still the Easter holidays. It is just about. Joining me until 7 o'clock, my panel this evening, Professor of Politics at the University of Kent, Matt Goodwin, and broadcast journalist Judita Da Silva. Thank you both so much for joining us this evening. Now, I want to hear from you as well. gbnews.com/your say, of course, is our new comments section that I'll be looking at throughout the show. So, immigration, the ECHR, net zero and trans ideology. In the past few weeks, there have been various people calling for referendums on all of these major issues. Do we need more direct democracy? Do we need to have more referendums on major issues? Right, Matt, let me come to you first. This is something that you mentioned in one of your most recent articles on your Substack. What brought up this topic for you?
Well, I think that particular article, I was looking at what could Rishi Sunak do to kind of bring back all of those disillusioned Conservatives, and I've surveyed all of the people who have been going over to the Reform Party, and I said, look, what would bring you back? And they said, well, we want a big, bold offer on immigration. You know, we want net migration slashed or potentially leave the European Convention on Human Rights. And my suggestion is, look, actually, one such offer for Rishi Sunak could be, let's really speak to this question about mass immigration once and for all. Let's have a national conversation, a referendum on reducing levels of immigration into Britain. And I think that's the only thing Rishi Sunak really could do to try and turn around his fortunes.
Because what that speaks to, actually, is a sense that the British public don't feel heard. I think possibly more than at any other time. We've had such a disruptive last 4 years, haven't we, Judita? But what is it at the moment that people feel so frustrated about? Is it the fact that we have had unelected prime ministers, maybe? What's going on that people wish? There seems to be, I think, a mood of the nation, and people will tell us at home tonight, that we do want to have more regular referendums on the big issues?
I don't know if it's so much about that. I do think it's a knock-on effect since what happened with former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, where the country did feel that they were all clamouring for a certain outcome, but there was a sort of inaction from people in power. And you then question yourself, what is the value of my vote if I have put you in there to represent me, but when I speak up for an opinion, you do not represent that? But then when you think of the referendums, you cannot kind of descend into a situation where you have leaders who are effectively warm bodies in positions while they let people govern themselves. Because at the same time, the reason you elect leaders is because you believe they can find a pragmatic middle ground to represent everyone. Whether or not you're Conservative or Labour, when you're in power, you represent everyone.
But does that mean then that there's a sense also that manifestos have not been kept to? Because we voted, it might just be that this is because we are in an election year, so maybe the public is clamouring to have their say. But it also speaks to this idea that manifesto promises aren't being met.
It's always going to be a balancing act, because in every country you have a manifesto that kind of is you waving a flag saying this is what I will do on my crusade as leader. But when you get into power, like I said, you have to represent everyone. So you find out what is it I can get through towards that manifesto I pledged myself on, the closest middle ground I can get to that without alienating effectively the other side of the population that didn't vote for me. So any leader is always going to get to a point that when they then do they collate what you achieved during your time in office, how closely did you meet your markers, knowing that it is impossible to meet all of them?
Do you think Prime Ministers do wish to do that once they get in office, to keep everyone happy all of the time?
Well, on many of these big issues that we've been talking about this week, for example, you know, we've got gender ideology with the Cass review, we've got immigration, leaving the ECHR, stopping the small boats. I think the fundamental problem in many Western democracies is that the elites who are presiding over the political system and also the cultural and a large chunk of the media elite too, who shape the national conversation, don't actually represent the vast majority of people on these issues. So migration would be a great example. We know that in more than 80% of constituencies in this country, a majority of people want to dramatically reduce the amount of immigration into Britain. But we also know that the political elites in charge of Westminster have been putting the pedal down on that issue, largely ignoring what they promised voters in their own manifesto. So the direct Democrats would argue, and I'm with them on this one actually, that when you get a really important issue to voters, like Brexit and our relationship with Europe, like migration, I would also argue, like what we're doing to kids with gender ideology, which in my view at least is nothing short of child abuse, and we can come back and talk about that. But some issues are so important to people, they actually need to be taken out of the daily, weekly discussion in Westminster. And we need to decide as a community, where do we want to go on that particular issue?
But how regularly, Matt, would you have to have those sorts of debates to try and keep more of the people happy more of the time?
Well, I mean, it depends. If you look at a democracy like Switzerland, they have referendums on a much more regular basis. I think, you know, other European democracies, the Netherlands, France, they've had big referendums on the Europe question. We've had one on Brexit. We've had one on AV reform, changing the election system. I think it would be very plausible, reasonable for Rishi Sunak to come out and say, look, enough is enough on this question. We either control our own borders or we don't. So what I'm going to do is take this to the British people, and I'm going to say, if you vote for me and the Conservatives, I understand why many people out there would perhaps be distrustful of that pledge, but if you vote for me, within a week, I will bring forward legislation to give you a referendum on leaving the ECHR and regaining control of your borders. Personally, I think that would be very popular among the voters he needs to win back.
Would you like to see that, Jadisa?
I think that certain things, I do agree that certain things have to go to a referendum because they speak fundamentally to the way individuals live their private lives every day, like the trans and the gender debate, 100%. But I do think that you open the floodgates with certain issues for when you have extremists within the population, because on one hand, there's a conversation about everyday people feeling that I can't deal with this community, I feel under threat by that community. And a referendum basically gives you an opportunity to wield power in numbers to oppress them in a way that would only basically would cause a flare-up, effectively a quote-unquote civil war.
We've never lived in a time when everything is so binary. Like, there is so much division now. We could list 5 topics where you have to feel this way and I feel this way. And this maybe would be good then in a referendum culture.
Can I just push back on you a little bit on that? Because when you look at issues like what we're doing to kids with puberty blockers and medical transitioning, or when you look at immigration, or when you look at stopping the small boats, much of the elite class would say, well, this is divisive. This is, you know, driving a wedge down the country and splitting 50% from 50%. I'm a pollster. I know what people think about these issues. And on many of them, and this is what worries the elite, on many of them, it's 75, 80% of people saying, you know what, we shouldn't call pregnant mothers, pregnant persons. You know what? We shouldn't allow 16-year-olds to change their gender without medical supervision. You know what? We should reduce levels of migration because they're too high. You know what? We should do whatever we need to do to control our own borders. So the reason I think the elites don't want to open up this conversation like they did with Brexit is because they know they will often lose these big debates.
Could that be the truth?
I don't think so. I think it's halfway. I think that there should be more referendums when it comes to social issues. The trans conversation is a very social issue. When you're talking about political and structural functionality, that is something that the government is obligated to take the lead on. That's why you're in that position. So I think you have to delineate...
Do you mean things like tax, maybe,
yes,
or how you structure the NHS?
Exactly, because with every individual, my life is very different to yours when you talk about finances and how we deal with those practical realities. But social things are more unifying because you have a larger swathe of people that can feel the same way.
And social things are often, it's that distinction between the public and the private, actually. Social things are often behind closed doors. But in a way, maybe that's the stuff that is difficult to have a referendum on, because surely that's the stuff as individuals we are just in control of anyway.
Well, I think there are questions that are existential for the national community, and our relationship with a supranational institution like the EU was one such question, because fundamentally it was about who are we? It was the biggest question a country can ask. What is our identity? And in the same way, questions like, you know, should we reduce migration? How do we control our borders?
Net zero.
Should we have more police on the streets? So should we reform our net zero policies? These are fundamental questions about the national community. And I think that's... Look, the message of Brexit, Beverly, I know you know this and many of the people watching, was that people actually... They want to have more voice in politics. They don't want less. They don't want more quangos. They don't want more unelected bureaucrats. They want more of a voice to affect the decisions that affect their lives, right? So let's lean into that. Let's have more democracy.
Which doesn't sound party political.
It doesn't, but...
And therefore, maybe Matt's right in terms of the fact that it is just a very small elite, we could call them the globalist elite, who want to retain the power and the control of the little people. And the last time they opened that can of worms with Brexit, it didn't go the way that they thought it might go.
Exactly, but then you also have to realise that a lot of the time, the reason it's kind of there's a duality that every individual has where I know how I feel, I know what I want, but I do defer to you because I know you know more. All the minutiae of actually governing a country is stuff that goes above the heads of the general population, and we don't want to spend our time thinking about that, so we defer to politicians.
Oh, I'm not sure about that.
Just on that. So one of the popular ideas after Brexit was let's go back to rule of the elites. Now, the problem with the elite class, as we've seen this week with the Cass review, is actually, guess what? They're not as competent and they're not as evidence-driven as they like to suggest. Let's think about foreign policy, the forever wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, the catastrophic failures in Libya, in Syria. Let's think about inequality and their failure to reduce levels of inequality in this country or to just control our borders. I get very nervous when people say, well, you must hand over trust and faith in the expert class, when, as we've seen again this week, you know, with the Cass review, the expert class basically abdicated their responsibility. And I don't want to zoom in on that specific example too much, but one of the most shocking things in Britain this week for me was the revelation that many experts were refusing to even participate with that review, were refusing to hand over data and evidence because they put dogma ahead of evidence. They
put profit ahead of evidence as well, because I would say in that situation it was the pharmaceutical companies that didn't want to collaborate with some of the Cass review because because a lot of the children were effectively guinea pigs in that, which does sort of tie into this issue as well, because if the public are voting on these fundamental issues, it also can take away some of the power from the people who might be funding various lobbying groups.
Indeed, because take the ECHR, and I'm going to look at it from two perspectives. When a lot of people talk about we do not need he keeps saying a foreign body governing our functionality. OK, that's fine. What you have to understand is that when you listen to the discourse in other countries, a lot of them say that the UK has to be very mindful that even though you have legacy and influence and prestige, the UK is a small island. That legacy and prestige was built on affiliations and partnerships and coalitions with other countries around the world. If you continuously make moves that make you look like you think you can stand alone against a governing body that looks after a whole swathe of countries, then you're alienating yourself and isolating yourself, and then you have to deal with consequence.
Although I suppose the obvious comeback to that would be that if you look at the UK, we are a member of the G7, we're a member of NATO, we've just signed AUKUS, we are falling over ourselves to sign trade deals with other countries around the world. This particular issue of the ECHR is really about, are we a self-governing, independent nation that can control our own borders, that can control who's coming in and who's going out, that can deport foreign criminals who are murdering and raping British people, or are we not? And I think that question, to go back to the referendum point, this is as existential as you can get for a nation.
No, but do you see how specific you got with describing the problem lines, which anyone would agree with? But what's the rhetoric around it is about dealing in numbers. Cut 700,000 down to 100,000. That doesn't go into the minutiae of the individual people who ought not to be here and those who have a valid right to apply to be here and stay. When we are using big numbers and overall policy to govern something that should be isolated on a case-by-case basis, you're conflating the argument, and that's why people get kind of frustrated about it, where those who just want to see numbers reduce are like, just make a policy, just protect our borders. But those who are on the receiving end of what the brunt of that will say, why am I being treated like a war criminal?
Well, as Thomas Sowell once said, immigration is one of the only issues which is talked about in terms of how to help people break the law. And that's what this conversation always reduces itself to, which is how do we help people break the law? Actually, most British people out there are thinking it's nuts that we've got 118,000 people entering Britain illegally, which the security services, by the way, which we tend to forget, have said is a direct security threat to the country and needs to be monitored. So
I think, just in terms of this referendum debate, though, one of the interesting things is what was the stats recently, Matt, about the percentage of immigration that people thought there was compared to what there actually is?
Well,
wasn't it that people think it's 10%
the average
of what it really
estimate,
is?
if you ask voters in this country to estimate what net migration is, the average estimate was 70,000 a year. Right. Now, of course, the reality is it's 700,000 a year.
Yeah.
Now, as you're right, actually, the ECHR issue won't fix legal migration, right? Yeah. So that's about government policy. But in terms of doing what we can to defend our national borders, to deport people who break the law, leaving the ECHR, I think, will be the next logical step in this debate.
OK. Our viewers are loving you too tonight, by the way, and I'm loving this new gbnews.com/yoursay system. Tony has said governments don't like referenda. They'll always reflect the will of the people, which is invariably at odds with what the ruling establishment has decided is best for themselves, and keep their bums on the green benches for as long as possible. And Keith makes a good point. Why not have a referendum at the same time as an election covering the current social issues like immigration, climate change, net zero, so that any elected organisation, government is required to enact. Right, keep your messages coming. Great start, guys. Thank you so much. Now, next, how much of your salary do you spend on rent? Because the latest statistics are absolutely staggering. This is Dewbs & Co. on GB News with Bev Turner.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
It's the first time we've had an admission from someone who, at least used to be very senior in the party, saying that this election is not about winning, really, for the Conservatives now. It's about mitigating the losses.
There is broad recognition that this election has already been lost and that it's about damage limitation. And it is really important because it's the difference between whether, if Labour win a slim majority, then the fight is on for the next election. I know it seems silly to look 5 years ahead, but it does make a difference, versus basically accepting that we have 10 years of Labour government ahead.
Having an acknowledgement that the Tories are going to lose and lose badly, disastrously maybe, having that acknowledgement coming from somebody so senior is very demoralising for everybody else in the party, but also doesn't it make it then look rather immoral for them to just drag on right through to maybe November?
Personally, I think Rishi Sunak should name the date now. I think he should name it for October or November.
In terms of reform, if they're only 4 points behind the Conservatives in the latest poll, do we need to stop the narrative, which we have been using legitimately, saying, well, they're doing all right in the polls, but they won't win any seats? Do we need to change that perspective now?
I think it's really difficult to say. It depends on Reform's electoral strategy. There's a lot of evidence that in certain parts of the country with certain demographics, they do have a really good chance. So I think if they target seats in the Red Wall and other places where there's big disillusionment with the Conservatives and what they'd promised, I can't imagine that Reform are at the stage where they could take masses of seats. It's more about that portion of the vote that they'll be taking away that I think is going to result in that massive Labour landslide.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's Dewbs & Co with me, Bev Turner, keeping me company until 7 o'clock. Professor of Politics at the University of Kent, Matt Goodwin, and broadcast journalist Judita Da Silva. Now, before we get back to the show, we've got some breaking news. We're going to go live to GB News' political editor, Christopher Hope, who's got some latest information about this Angela Rayner story. Good morning. Good morning. You see, I'm normally on in the mornings, Chris. I automatically say that. Good evening to you, Chris. Nice to see you after midday.
Good evening, Bev.
Right, what's happening with Angela Rayner and this capital gains tax furore that she can't escape?
That's right. And good evening, Bev, and good to see you too. No, it's not just capital gains tax. There's also confusion about whether she was living at this address that in the house that she sold back in 2015. Under pressure all day, Labour back her, but she put out a statement just now, just before 6 o'clock, saying that she will now sit down with the appropriate authorities, including the police and HMRC, to set out the facts and draw a line over the row over this home in Manchester. And crucially, she says she will resign, Bev, if she's found to have committed a criminal offence. I will say, as I said before, if I committed a criminal offence, I would, of course, do the right thing and step down. She adds here, the questions relate to a time before I was an MP, and I'll set out my family's circumstances and take an expert tax and legal advice. I look forward to setting out the facts with the relevant authorities at the earliest opportunity. That's advice she had already taken, and so far Sir Keir Starmer has refused to ask to see. Of course, Sir Keir Starmer and others in Labour are backing Angela Rayner as things stand. But this means, I think, it does raise the temperature in this story. It means that if the police do find criminal wrongdoing, and that would be relating most likely to whether she was telling the electoral register she was in an address she wasn't living in at the time. If that's the case, she will resign.
What would that mean for the Labour Party and Sir Keir Starmer, Christopher?
It would be very, very damaging. Angela Rayner consistently polls very, very highly. She's well regarded by Labour voters and activists. I think even some people who voted for the Tory party in 2019 in a red wall, they look at her and like her honesty and transparency. And this whole saga has caused damage to her, I think, politically. She hasn't done many interviews. She's been quite hiding away and not being out fronting up as well as she would have done. I think there's a chance here to draw a line. The problem she's got is how long it will take. Police investigations can take months, and it could be that this whole issue raises its head on the eve of a likely general election, as I see it, in late November. If that happens, it could have quite a bearing on that campaign. We'll wait and see. She is quite secure, though, Bev, because she's elected by members of the Labour Party. So Keir Starmer can't sack her. She's there because she's voted in by party members, so it would be up to her to resign were she to go. Of course, as things stand, as we've been making very clear, she maintains she's done nothing wrong at all.
OK, all right, thank you, Christopher. Juditha, let me come to you first, because this actually ties in perfectly with the issue that we were going to be debating anyway, which is whether politicians from, let's call them, working-class backgrounds, state school educated, are given a different level of tolerance, let's say, than the classic Eton public school boy set, because she has definitely been under the cosh with certain areas of the media, let's say, in terms of this particular story, in a way that I don't think necessarily some of the boarding school, public school boys have.
I think it works both ways, because I always say that there's this weird catch-22 in politics where it's a dirty game that expects all players to be squeaky clean, which is impossible. But then, from as far back as when we were learning in school about Gladstone and Disraeli, there's always parapolitical discourse about on socioeconomic lines, on class lines. It's part of the playing field when you're in politics, who you are, where you came from, and do you have a right to be here. But what you've seen over time is that being working class, being blue collar, really moves the needle when it comes to voters, because they see themselves in you. So it works against the posh elite, because people think, like we've said, that has been mentioned this evening, you're out of touch, you don't represent me, you look down on me, you deign to represent what I think.
So why aren't there more people like that in politics?
Because it's almost like what happens when when they say people are bred for politics or bred for power. It's something you kind of commit to very early on in life, or your parents commit to. What you find is that with working class or lower middle class people, they don't have the same stability financially from their parents or grandparents for that plan to be put in action when it needs to be, so that by the time you're now in the playing field, your pedigree is already pre-polished to be entering that gaming landscape.
We can kind of name them, Matt, can't we, the famous politicians that weren't from the right side of the tracks. John Prescott is the really famous one.
Lee Anderson.
And Lee Anderson. And Tony Blair put Prescott in there, arguably for the reason that Juditha was saying, because Tony Blair was kind of poshish and he appealed to, your sort of hedge fund managers. And yet John Prescott, we're seeing the footage here, the famous footage of him, which really played into that stereotype that he was a thug, dragged up from the streets. Yeah. He was there to offset the Blair public school cabinet, which was huge.
Well, working-class politicians are so noticeable in this country because there are so few of them. And if you look at what's happened in the House of Commons over the last 30, 40 years, from the data on MPs, the share of MPs from working-class backgrounds has collapsed to a historic low. I believe there's only 7% of MPs are from working-class backgrounds. Meanwhile, the number of MPs who belong to the university class, who belong to the more elite university class, Oxbridge or Russell Group universities, has never been higher. The number of MPs who have always been in politics, have been local councillors, have been political party media officers, has never been higher. So Westminster has become more like an insular club, if you like. But, Bev, it's not just politics. It's media, much of the media too, creative industries, cultural institutions. I've written about this before. If you're working class, if you haven't gone to university, if you're not from London, if mummy and daddy aren't very rich and well off and connected in London circles, and if, God forbid, you also happen to hold culturally conservative views or anti-establishment views, then look, I mean, the deck is stacked against you in a whole array of institutions.
This current shadow cabinet at the moment, which might end up being our government, only 13% of them went to private school. Starmer went to a grammar school, which then actually became a private school while he was there. But does it matter Jadisa?
It doesn't matter because it shouldn't matter. But it does matter because it's kind of like when they say, when you get in the ring, how good are your gloves? Because at the end of the day, whoever you're picking to be leader is going to be getting into the ring with the best of the best around the world. So do you have the pedigree, the preparation, and basically the wherewithal to represent the country against anyone who's put in the ring with you? And that's what the deck is stacked against them, because you don't have the input and the infrastructure made available to you to begin to be cultivated to occupy these kinds of positions and the expectations of you when you're in them.
But you could be as intelligent.
Yeah.
Yeah, but let's just remember, this also has profound consequences, because who represents you then trickles down into the policies that affect your daily lives, into the decisions that shape our country. So there's a wonderful, I mean, I've written about this on Substack, but there's a wonderful book called Diploma Democracies, which has shown how across the West, as legislatures have become filled with, you know, elite university graduates from very privileged families that tend to share the same values, that tend to see the world in the same kind of way, what's happened is that the policy process and all of the decisions coming out of parliaments around those Western democracies have reflected the interests of that elite class at the expense of everybody else. So what do we need to do? We need to get more working class voices into politics. We need to get more non-graduates into politics.
You can't challenge the symptom unless you go back to the beginning. You're ill-equipped to do the job, because at the end of the day, no one's saying that you can't come. Why you're not stepping up for the job is because they don't feel equipped to do it. And I've always said, like, there's a difference between Westminster and local government. It matters more to the everyday person who's with you, who's the boots on the ground. Those should be more representative of working-class, blue-collar people, because you're there in the trenches with everyday population. And that will then be a knock-on effect to the top, because, like you say, when it comes to an election, if you don't have all the soldiers marching in the same direction as you, your party falls apart. If they are the working class and they are the representation of the people, they will speak to the leadership.
The only issue there, and I agree with you, is, as we saw with Brexit, there is enormous class prejudice in this country. And when many of the institutions, the civil service, government, many prominent newspapers, many prominent journalists, the reason they struggled with things like Brexit is because it was overwhelmingly driven by ordinary working class people. And so when they were using words like gammons and bigots and thickos, most of those people, by the way, having gone to Oxford, studying PPE, living in London, Oxford, Cambridge, what that reflected, to me at least, as somebody from a pretty ordinary working class background, was this enormous amount of class prejudice in this country that we see playing out every day, every week. I think many of the institutions, Bev, need to ask themselves, why aren't there more normal, ordinary people in those institutions? We need to reform the institutions in this country. We need to basically open them up to a much wider array of perspectives.
You're state school educated, so am I. You're privately educated. Did anybody ever say to you should be a politician?
When I did my standardised testing, it was one of that or go into stock and into the
stocks and shares.
But the last thing we need are more bankers in politics.
But how about you, Matt? Did anybody ever say to you? Because listen, our inbox is very much wants you to stand as an MP. Listening to you tonight,
it's interesting. A lot of people on the Substack that we've got, they say the same thing, because I think for lots of people who are watching and listening, we can all sense the same thing, right? Which is that our politics and national conversation represent the values, the tastes and the priorities of 10% of this country. So 90% on a whole array of issues are feeling as though they're not even in this conversation at all. And I feel that when you turn on, you know, the media in the morning and so on, and you look at the decisions coming out of the House of Commons.
Sometimes on the way in, when driving into Britain's newsroom, I put on the Today programme on Radio 4.
But you see what I'm saying? Like, that's an ironic point.
So detached from most people that I know.
But I think it's ironic because from everything you've said, the glaringly obvious solution is what Americans call affirmative action. Because when you think about a lot of politicians...
What we would call positive discrimination.
Basically, yeah. Because things like a PPE from Oxbridge, that's kind of like the bread and butter of most politicians in Westminster. It's like a rite of passage to getting there. If you had a quote-unquote affirmative action policy in universities like Oxford and Cambridge for people from lower income families, because they're exceptionally intelligent people in state schools, and gave them access to that, then you're starting to offset the imbalance.
But better yet, why don't we even move away from this assumption that people who dominate our national life don't have to have gone to university. I mean, there is a discussion beyond that, which is why on earth are all of our institutions dominated by elite graduates? Why can't we just have some normal, ordinary people? Most people in this country, remember, have never gone to university, right?
But that's when
So
I
why
say
don't we
it
have
goes
some-
back to the expectations of playing in the global field. There are certain levels of conversation and certain styles of discourse that the discipline that is drummed into you by higher education prepares you for. Do you want the best kind of politician representing you or don't you?
We've got to take another break, I'm afraid, but you're all giving me a hard time saying that Boris Johnson didn't get told off for Partygate. I know he did. I know that, but I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. Right, next, we're going to be talking about how much of your salary you might spend on rent. The figures are unbelievable. This is Dewbs & Co. on GB News.
Good evening. Here's your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. Showers for many of us this weekend, but towards the southeast, something a little bit drier, and that's because we have high pressure dominating over the near continent. Further north, though, a frontal system is pushing its way through, and that's going to bring some further outbreaks of rain across some parts of Scotland into northern England as we go through the night. Also, some strong gusty winds and a few showers towards the northwest of Scotland, but elsewhere, largely dry as we go through the early hours of Saturday morning, and some clear skies, but despite these, temperatures not dropping a huge amount. A touch cooler than last night, but a relatively mild start on Saturday nonetheless. First thing, there could be some murkiness, some low cloud perhaps around English Channel coastal parts, but otherwise, particularly towards the southeast, it's going to be a largely fine day. Decent amount of sunshine, a bit more cloud and some rain across northern and western parts of England and Wales. Nothing heavy here. The heaviest downpours likely across parts of Scotland. Could be some gusty winds here too. Temperatures will be down a nudge compared to today, but still a little bit above average for the time of year. Into Sunday, and it is going to be a fresher day for all of us. There will be plenty of showers piling in across parts of Northern Ireland and particularly Scotland. Some heavy, some thundery, could be some hail mixed in. Further south and east across the bulk of England and Wales, it's actually looking like a largely dry day with some decent sunshine. More showers to come as we go through Monday and to Tuesday, but it is going to be noticeably fresher than it has been of late. Bye-bye.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner with the latest. A couple of motorway closures on this Friday night. First of all, the northbound carriageway of the M6 in Cumbria stays shut from junction 39 at Shap up to 40 at Penrith at the A66 after a lorry overturn causing long queues. And the opposite side of the carriageway still has the outside lane closed. In Lancashire, the M65 is shut eastbound from junction 8 to 10 towards Burnley for a police investigation causing long queues and along the Accrington bypass as you divert. And on the M1 in Derbyshire, the two inside lanes are closed northbound just after the A38 exit, junction 28. A vehicle caught fire, recovery works are underway. It's taking about half an hour to get through. On the western stretch of the M25, clockwise, the inside lanes closed just after the M4 following an accident causing long delays. And on London Underground, Warwick Avenue station has been closed. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. Dewbs & Co. with me, Bev Turner, this Friday evening. Now, 1 in 5 tenants are spending over half of their salary on rent. With an estimated 11.6 million people privately renting across the UK, this means that roughly 2.3 million tenants are spending over half of their pay before tax on rent. How have we got here, Matt Goodwin?
Well, the short answer is we have a housing crisis which nobody in politics is really prepared to deal with head-on. Rents are going up because demand is massively outstripping supply. So on the one hand, we're not building enough houses and we're not easing planning to build those houses. But secondly, let me say something controversial. I've said it on this channel before. We've got way too many people coming into the country. I'm just going to give you one stat. Last year, we built 180,000 homes in this country. The government target is 300,000. If you look at all of the credible estimates of what we need to build going forward, just to keep up with demand from this ever-growing population. We're going to need to build 550,000 homes every year. We are not even coming close. So if these rents are high, Beverly, if these rents are high, just wait 5 years.
Is that the problem, Juditha?
Yeah, that is partly the problem. But then also remember that this is the knock-on effect of the pandemic, because you had a period where landlords had tenants in homes that weren't paying rent and they couldn't evict them. So now they're healing from the hurt. And also with the release of the kinds of restrictions that were put on rent increases on landlords, they're kind of recouping costs retroactively. And also because you've got a situation where people who are working don't earn enough money to buy homes. They have to rent for longer. And while they're renting, they don't earn enough money to put money away to save for a home. And so now you've got what was originally thought, people in their 20s, singletons, they rent. Now it's families who are renting for longer.
Well, since lockdown, since the pandemic, rent has risen by 29%. That's huge. And I know what you're saying about there was some houses which couldn't be rented out. But was that really the case, do you think, during lockdown?
Because even when I moved into my new flat, when we were looking, the number of stories where agents were like, when they do your financial check, you need to have at least be earning almost 3 times, 2.5 to 3 times what the rent is, because previously their tenants had been there for 6-8 months and weren't paying any rent and couldn't be evicted. So now the landlords are kind of getting retroactive payback.
Right.
And yeah.
And perhaps being greedy?
Being greedy, but I think fundamentally we have got a crisis here that is so big, and politicians on both the left and right are putting their heads in the sand. I mean, I have to come back to this point. You know, if you wanted to get a flat in London, as you know, on average you're competing with, they think, between 20 and 30 other people. Many of those, by the way, are not from Britain. I think we need to talk about having some sort of principle of national preference in the housing market. I don't think houses and flats should be held in offshore trusts by offshore companies. I think all of that stuff needs to be looked at and changed. But more fundamentally, unless we're going to be building another 300,000, 400,000 homes every year for the foreseeable future, while running these levels of migration, we're not going to fix this crisis. So here's a simple thing I would say to every politician in Westminster. You can have available, affordable housing, or you can have mass immigration. You cannot have both.
Great way to end, because we're going to talk about mansplaining next. That wasn't mansplaining, Matt.
No,
that was just you being
a very
very
succinct
clever.
answer.
That was brilliant. Right, mansplaining. Maybe it's just a show of strength from men who are more confident than us women. We're going to be debating that. Dewbs & Co. on GB News.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Mark White was saying there, Sue, that he thinks it's getting worse, and you were nodding along to that. You've seen this over decades. Situation is sprawling along the coast, more people, and the danger is ramping up.
Definitely, because the numbers and the money it's run like a military operation. I mean, I've been told that by the National Crime Agency, and I don't need to be told it by them to know it. It is meticulous because there's so much money involved. So they're marshalling migrants here, the gangs, they're controlling the gangs, and there will be a kingpin. You know, in some city far away in Erbil, or even in Paris, or in Brussels, who never goes anywhere near the beaches. It's like a Ponzi scheme, really.
Yeah. With that in mind, there's such vested interest, such money, such demand, a never-ending string of demand of people who want to come here.
People are already on their way, remember?
Yeah.
If we stop them now, they're already leaving. There's people leaving the Sudan now are going to reach the only place they want to get to, the French beaches, to get to the UK. They'll arrive in 2.5 years' time.
And so,
you see, they're on their way.
If it's that organised, that lucrative, that desirable, how on earth do we ever break that chain?
It sounds incredibly harsh, but I think if the EU change politically in the June elections, which I think it probably will, I think they will put up, as the Greeks have done, holding camps all over Europe, the coasts of Europe, where people are assessed, just to see who is coming in, which would be a plus, as the Greeks have done, because we have no idea who is coming in.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
This is Dewbs and Co with me, Bev Turner, keeping me company until 7 o'clock. Professor of Politics at the University of Kent and professional pollster Matt Goodwin and broadcast journalist Judita De Silva. I love this show. It's Fizzy Friday, everybody. So cheers. So don't give me this in the morning on Britain's Newsroom.
I think
Probably
I need it after this week. I mean, depressing stories all round.
It's been quite the week, Matt, you're right. Now, we're talking about mansplaining. Have you ever been on the receiving end of a patronising man trying to help you? Well, there's one clip, it went viral. It was around a little while ago, but it's making the rounds again now. It's professional golfer Georgia Ball, who was practising, great name for a golfer, and this is what happened.
Excuse me. What you're doing there, you shouldn't be doing that. You should be right through, swing and follow through. Not, you're doing too slow on the way up and then back.
Okay, I'm going through a swing change at the minute, so everything I'm...
What you're doing there is you're coming back too slow. You know, I've been playing golf for 20 years. What you need to do is follow through a lot quicker than what you're doing there right now.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm going through a swing change at the minute, so with that, I'm just making everything...
If you're listening on the radio, this is professional golfer Georgia Ball, who's practising her swing when a guy off camera has basically come and said, you're not doing that properly, you need to do it slightly differently. And she's being very polite to him in her Scouse accent. Here she goes.
She's got a great swing.
Right, so this brought up this issue of mansplaining. And I don't know, maybe we give men a hard time. Judita, what's going through the mind of a man who sees a professional golfer and decides to give us some tips?
Yeah, I mean, because people were saying, like, oh, is it so bad to explain? But look at the execution. She's done her swing and he goes, what you need to do is make that a man. He would not execute it that way. That's where the mansplaining comes in, because the entitlement to think that you can go to this stranger, because what he's seen is a pretty girl playing golf. So it's like, oh, sweetheart, you need to do this to be better at what you're doing, because I know.
But maybe we can learn something from men doing that.
Yeah, that's why I said it's the execution. There's a way to have gone there and say, like, oh, I just was watching your swing. Could I just say something? And be like, oh, yeah, sure. Let her invite your suggestion and then give it.
No, but what I mean is, sorry, my question was rubbish. What I mean is maybe we as women should do more women-splaining. Like, there's a confidence behind that man saying, oh, I can do that better than you, love. Go on, are you a mansplainer, Matt?
I'm not sure.
Would you know if you were?
I would like a golf lesson off Georgia Ball. That's
yeah.
I would like her to teach me how to play golf, because I really want to learn to play golf. If you're watching, Georgia, you can DM me on Twitter. But in all seriousness, I think in the world of politics in Westminster, I think it is slightly different in that most of the women I know in that community are very confident, outspoken, and maybe it's less prominent than it might be in sports, but that's the kind of instinctive reaction. I think also golfing has a very strange culture to it as well. I think it is very, it's all about the clubs and the bars and the, all of that stuff that goes with it. It's sort of very male heavy.
Does it, in your life then, in the circles that you move in, have you ever had a woman come up to you in a professional environment and say, Matt, I think, when you do your polling thing, you're not quite getting your questions right. You need to do it differently.
A lot all the time. I mean, I have a lot of women who would say things like, I read your book and I read your Substack and I disagree with 80% of what you say.
But isn't that different? Because that's not mansplaining, is it? Like, just say. So if they came to you and said, "I read your book. You got it wrong. You needed to do it like this."
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it something about the delivery? Because just saying to you,
I suspect so. I mean, I definitely have received a lot of criticism, substantive criticism from women, but I haven't interpreted that along the lines of them being women. It's just criticism that I've received for things that I've said. Whereas I think probably, I'm going to come back to the other side of the panel, I think probably the way in which it's delivered, and that video was a bit cringy.
Because when you look at the dynamics, she's a professional golfer, but we knew that as the subtext. But in that moment, you're playing golf, and then from the back, you just hear what you need to be doing is. That already positions yourself as a position of authority, and that is the platform on which you say where mansplaining comes from, where I'm looking down on you on a point and feel I'm better than you, and you require me to be better.
What is interesting, though, is the point that you made, because the research, there was some, one of the universities did some research onto this, and they found that when women were mansplained to, they took it as a criticism of them and their ability. Whereas when men were similarly condescended to or were talked down to, they didn't, when they were questioned, they didn't take it as a slight.
Yeah.
And that's all credit to men.
No, it's power dynamics, because when you exist in a situation where, based on just biology and physicality, men are physically stronger, a woman is not seen as a threat, no matter how she approaches you. We have to constantly, existentially navigate a sense of potential threat and whatever situation you're in with a man.
I had a conversation with a female friend about this recently who made that point, explaining how different it is for women to navigate almost every social situation. And having a daughter, being very conscious of the things she's going to have to experience along those lines. The one thing that makes me nervous, though, about mansplaining, and this is probably the bit where I get cancelled and never appear on GB News ever again.
Oh, that won't happen.
We also have to be careful not to create a climate and a culture where people become so anxious about what they can and cannot say that we never have any meaningful conversations at all. Like, I could feel myself in this conversation holding back, thinking, well, hang on a second, what's correct? What is correct? What isn't?
All he had to do was say, like, hi, what's your swing? Can I possibly suggest something? Okay, sure.
And actually, maybe...
So that wouldn't be
well, and you know what? Because it is sexist, because there is no woman-splaining. We need to have woman-splaining and mansplaining. Right, I might do a bit of that on Monday morning. I'll be back on 9:30. Thank you so much, Jadita and Matt. Up next, Lee Anderson.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Here's your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. Showers for many of us this weekend, but towards the southeast, something a little bit drier, and that's because we have high pressure dominating over the near continent. Further north, though, a frontal system is pushing its way through, and that's going to bring some further outbreaks of rain across some parts of Scotland into northern England as we go through the night. Also, some strong gusty winds and a few showers towards the northwest of Scotland, but elsewhere largely dry as we go through the early hours of Saturday morning, and some clear skies, but despite these, temperatures not dropping a huge amount. A touch cooler than last night, but a relatively mild start on Saturday nonetheless. First thing, there could be some murkiness, some low cloud perhaps around English Channel coastal parts, but otherwise, particularly towards the southeast, it's going to be a largely fine day. Decent amount of sunshine, a bit more cloud and some rain across northern and western parts of England and Wales. Nothing heavy here. The heaviest downpours likely across parts of Scotland. Could be some gusty winds here too. Temperatures will be down a nudge compared to today, but still a little bit above average for the time of year. Into Sunday, and it is going to be a fresher day for all of us. There will be plenty of showers piling in across parts of Northern Ireland and particularly Scotland. Some heavy, some thundery, could be some hail mixed in. Further south and east across the bulk of England and Wales, it's actually looking like a largely dry day with some decent sunshine. More showers to come as we go through Monday and to Tuesday, but it is going to be noticeably fresher than it has been of late. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News. The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner with the latest. Long queues through Cumbria do continue. The northbound carriageway of the M6 stays closed from junction 39 to 40 between the Shap and Penrith exits. They're recovering a lorry that's overturned. The outside lane is also closed on the opposite side of the carriageway. In Lancashire, the M65 is closed eastbound junction 8 to 10 west of Burnley and westbound at junction 10 for this ongoing police investigation. Long queues on the M1 heading north through Derbyshire just after the A38 exit, junction 28. The left lane's closed for recovery work after a vehicle caught fire. On the Kent stretch of the M25, there are clockwise queues. The two left lanes are closed just after the QE2 bridge near Dartford. A lorry and a car have collided. And on London Underground, the Bakerloo line's now been suspended from Queen's Park to Harrow and Wealdstone because of problems with the signals. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Variety Cruises have been sailing since 1942, and thanks to them, you could set sail in 2025. You have the chance to win a 7-night small boat cruise for two worth £10,000. With your flights, meals, drinks and excursions included, you can choose from any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and find your home at sea. You'll also win an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash that you can use to make this summer spectacular. We'll also treat you to these luxury travel gifts. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only.